Hey, Spring Breakers. I wanted to get you guys through the last 7 slides that we didn't really have time for before we all scurried away to have a little bit of relaxation. So I'm going to walk you through these 7 slides. Where we left off was the income expenditure equilibrium, and we walked through and talked about, hey, where is the point where real GDP is equal to planned aggregate expenditures? And the only time that that happens is when unplanned investment spending is zero. And that's only going to happen whenever firms predict inventories perfectly. So they predict how much they need to invest in investment spending with perfect accuracy. So let's see why this is an equilibrium. Okay, so we are going to start out with these with our 3 equations. GDP is going to equal consumption plus investment, and that's coming from the assumptions of the model, right? We took out government, we took out net imports, we took out imports and exports. And then you have total investment spending is going to be planned investment spending plus unplanned investment spending. And then once we sub in for the letter I in that first equation, you have GDP is going to equal consumer spending plus planned investment plus unplanned investment. Now we also know that aggregate expenditures planned are going to be just consumption plus planned investment. Now, GDP is only going to equal planned aggregate expenditures if and only if, so it goes both ways, if total investment is equal to planned investment. So now, we're going to go through and talk about when is unplanned investment negative and when is it positive, because we can have both, right? We could have consumers spending more than they need to, and we can have consumers spending less than we think they're going to. So what we're going to talk about here is in this equilibrium, we're going to put a little caveat on it. It's going to be called stability, and we'll talk about this in other econ classes too. But this stability means that we're always going to go back towards this equilibrium if we have any deviation from it. So let's consider the first case where planned aggregate expenditures is greater than GDP. What does that mean? Well, sub in our equations. We have consumption plus planned investment on the left is greater than consumption plus planned investment plus unplanned investment on the right. Once we cancel out the C's and the I planned, that leaves us with unplanned investment is going to be less than zero. Okay, this implies unplanned investment is less than zero because firms are going to have less inventories than what they anticipated. Okay, this is because consumers purchased more, right? Inventories became negative or more negative than they had planned because consumers decided they wanted their goods right now. So if unplanned investment is negative, what are they going to do? They're going to increase their production. What that's going to do is going to increase our GDP, right? That's if you go back to this bold-faced case 1, we're going to increase our GDP back until it gets to planned aggregate expenditures. Okay, second case, right? Did our first case where planned expenditures are greater than GDP. Now let's look if aggregate expenditures planned are less than GDP. Same exact thing, we're going to put in our equations, we're going to sub in, cancel out the C's plus the I planned. That means that unplanned investment is greater than zero. That means that we have more inventories than we thought we were going to. So consumers didn't buy as much as we had planned on them. So our unplanned investment is positive. If this happens and they have a bunch of boxes sitting in a warehouse, they are going to cut back their production this year because they already have boxes sitting there. This is going to decrease our GDP in that year. Now, GDP is going to go back to planned aggregate expenditures. So the idea of stability is that if we are not at the point where planned aggregate expenditures equals GDP, if we are less than or greater than, we're going to slowly move back towards this equilibrium where AE planned equals GDP. So now, what is this actual intersection referred to as? We call it the Keynesian cross. Okay. What we're going to do is put on our planned aggregate expenditures graph, you're going to put a 45-degree line. Now, think about what a 45-degree line actually means if you were to plot it out on a graph, right? A 45-degree line would be XY pairs such as 1, 1, 2, 2, 3, 3, 4, 4, so on and so forth. Now, if I sub that in and said, this is where planned aggregate expenditures, 1 is your number that we're going to use, equals GDP, 1, which is your number. So this dotted line that I'm going to use to represent this, the 45-degree line implies all of these pairs where the X value equals the Y value. That is our equilibrium. So wherever our planned aggregate expenditures line intersects that 45-degree line, that's where the equilibrium is, because that is the point where my X value, which is real GDP, is going to equal my Y value, which is planned aggregate expenditures. So let's look at a picture of that. So you see this dotted line where it's a 45-degree line. It's in the gray, it's dotted, and it says AE planned equals GDP. That's, again, all of your points where the X value equals the Y value. Now the purple line or the magenta line is our planned aggregate expenditures, where we have both consumption and planned investment. So, and remember, planned investment is constant, such as the $500 in the example that we did in class, and the consumption is the consumption function that we derived in the very beginning of this chapter. So at the point where where AE planned, point E, equals GDP, that's where it crosses the 45-degree line. That is our equilibrium value for the income expenditure model. Now, let's look at where real GDP is $1,000. So that's on the left-hand side. If real GDP is $1,000, you plug in and find that this implies that your unplanned investment is negative $400. So that means that consumers are buying more than what we thought they would. So we are going to slowly move to the right on our planned aggregate expenditures line until we get to point E. Now, if you look at where real GDP is $2,500, you find that unplanned investment is positive $200. This means that we have more inventories that we thought that we were going to. So therefore, we're going to cut back on our production this year, reducing our GDP and bringing us back to point E again. Okay, and that's where the arrows at the bottom of the slide are showing you I planned is negative, GDP rises, and I planned is positive and GDP falls. So this graph is very important. I hope that you take some time to understand what the 45-degree line means, where and when unplanned investment is positive or negative. Please don't just memorize it, that left hand, right hand side. Take some time and really get to understanding why at that point unplanned investment is negative and what happens then and how we move back towards equilibrium. Okay, so what if this equilibrium output is below the full employment? This is a slide that's going to talk you through, visually talk you through what happens to our equilibrium, to our output, if it's below the full level of employment. So to achieve this full level employment, what we're going to do, hopefully, is increase autonomous spending. Okay, so that's going to be a shift in the A, right? A shift in the A and allowing us to move our aggregate expenditure line upwards. Okay, so dust it off, change in GDP, right? We want to make our X value change, is going to equal the multiplier that we spent a lot of time talking about, multiplied by the change in autonomous spending. Okay, so if we want to shift our curve upwards, what we're going to do is increase our autonomous spending. right? What we spend whenever our GDP or our output is 0. Let's do an example. So your actual output is $2,000. However, the full employment is $3,000. So what's going to happen? We need to change GDP by $1,000. Does that mean we change our autonomous spending by $1,000? Hopefully you're saying no. What do? Well, we need to know what people's marginal propensity is to consume any increase in spending that we give them. And in this example, the MPC is 0.6. So we're going to spend 60 cents out of every dollar we're given. The multiplier then is 1 divided by 1 minus MPC. Go back in the slides if you forgot that. And you find that the multiplier is 2.5. Okay, so every dollar that we put into the economy is going to multiply by the end to $2.50. So the question becomes, how much do we need to change our autonomous spending by? What we do is set up our same equation where we're going to just divide the multiplier to the side with change in GDP because we know those two numbers. Now we have one equation with one unknown. We can definitely solve this. So $1,000 is what we want the GDP to change by, and we're going to divide it by the multiplier, which is 2.5, finding out that our actual planned expenditures our actual change in autonomous spending should be $400. So now my question to you would be, can you put this on your graph? Can you represent this on a graph? Of course we can. So beforehand, what we had was our $800 in autonomous spending. You can see that as the light pink line, your y-intercept. Now afterwards, the magenta line, we increase our autonomous spending by $400, giving us a y-intercept now of $1,200. So where has that moved us from? Before we were at E1. Before we were at E1, where our real GDP was $2,000 and our planned aggregate spending was $2,000. However, our unplanned level of investment at that time would have been negative $400. So what we did is we shifted our line upwards, and now we have the intersection at AE Plan 2 on the line AE Plan 2, E2, where our GDP is $3,000 and our planned aggregate spending is also $3,000. So if we are not at full employment and we want to get to full employment, we need to increase our GDP somehow. So what we do is change our autonomous spending, but we don't have to change it by that full $1,000. We change it by $400, letting the multiplier take effect, and then coming to our new equilibrium where our real GDP is $3,000 and our full employment level is also $3,000. So whenever we change our autonomous spending here, this is where I said the government just is going to do something and put money into the economy. However, what we are going to officially call this is when the government enacts these policies trying to get people to spend money, we're going to call this fiscal policy, and we'll have a whole chapter on that. Now, this income expenditure model, tying this all back, because we have AE planned being negative, showing an increase in GDP, AE planned being positive, showing a decrease in GDP, this leads economists to believe that inventories are a really good indicator as to whether the economy is expanding, right? People are buying more than we think that they should, leading us to say, okay, now we're going to produce more this year. And if it's contracting, then that means that there's a positive unplanned inventories where people aren't buying as much as we thought. So there's probably something that's not good going on. The economy is contracting. So I hope you all have gotten a lot from these 7 slides. I hope this sets you up nicely for the homework. If you have any questions, please let me know. Please feel free to email me. And please enjoy your spring break. I will see you all in a couple weeks. Have a great time.